Very high frequency omnidirectional range, otherwise known as VOR, is a type of short range radio navigation system. The first set of VORs was deployed in 1946, just after the end of World War II, and a huge increase in modern commercial aircraft, aviation, and services. VORs were the primary means of navigating overland until GPS, which didn't emerge in the aviation industry until the late 70s. The GPS, of course, is a global positioning system using satellites. Thousands of VORs are still in service around the globe. Just shy of 1,000 are still in service in the United States, with many of them being decommissioned soon. These VORs are used to get from point A to point B on a daily basis around the country. The way a VOR works is by sending out a continuous, very high frequency radio wave. This wave speeds around the 360-degree axis of the VOR 30 times a second. Along with this radio wave, a second 30 Hz reference signal is placed on a subcarrier wave timed to be in phase with the directional antenna. This reference signal is the same on all VORs. The difference between the reference signal and the signal amplitude is the bearing from the VOR station to the receiver relative to magnetic north. This line of position is called the VOR radial. Now, I know that sounded like a bunch of information. You may not have understood all of it, and that's okay. What you need to understand is that a VOR puts out directional radio frequencies. It gives you a radial. Now, of course, your aircraft has to be VOR capable, like the Cessna 172, for example. A VOR generally has between 25 nautical miles to 130 nautical mile radius from the VOR station. It is tuned to a certain VHF, very high frequency that your navigational radio can receive and decode to give you the information needed to direct you on the appropriate radial into or from the VOR station. Each VOR station has a Morse code. This Morse code allows you, the pilot, to hear and understand which VOR you're trying to connect to or you're looking for. There are three types of VORs and three different service volume classifications. I'm just going to go over them here with you for reference. You don't have to memorize these. You have the VOR, VOR DME, and VORTAC. VOR gives you a radial, and that's it. A VOR/DME gives you a radial and distance from the station. DME stands for distance measuring equipment. A VORTAC does the same job as a VOR DME, but it uses a military system rather than a civilian DME. There are three service volume classifications, like I mentioned, and they are T as in Tango, L as in Lima, and H as in Hotel. T is for terminal, which serves about 1,000 feet AGL up to and including 12,000 feet AGL, and has a radius generally about 25 nautical miles. This is generally to keep a certain small little area, but doesn't want to push out and interfere with any other type of radio frequencies in the area. L is for low altitude, which serves from 1,000 feet AGL up to and including 18,000 feet AGL, and has a radius of approximately 40 nautical miles. H is for, you guessed it, high altitude, which services about 1,000 feet AGL up to and including 14,500 AGL at 40 nautical miles, 14,500 AGL up to 18,000 AGL, out to 100 nautical miles, and 18,000 AGL up to and including 45,000 AGL, 130 nautical miles, and finally above that is 100 nautical miles. So, how do you use VOR to navigate? Well, first we need to plan our flight. You have to know what the VOR is looking like, what VOR you want to fly to, and understand how to get to and from on a map before you can inside the aircraft. We'll be using SkyVector for this demonstration. Finding the VOR is really simple. Find a VOR. When you're looking at a VFR sectional, all you're looking for is this blue circle here with all these tick marks and giving you the degrees from 0 to 30 to 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, and so forth, all the way around the compass. There are 3 different types, as I mentioned, different VORs, and they all have different identifiers. If we look up here at the Marconi VOR, you'll see it's a VOR DME. How do you know that? Well, it has the hexagon of a VOR and the square of a DME around it. Whenever you find the VOR that you're looking for, you'll notice that this box right here. This box is actually the information that you'll need in order to tune that VOR. This is the Marconi VOR. The frequency we would need to tune would be 114.7. If you are a military aircraft, to get your DME, you would have to tune your TRACON to channel 94, but most of us won't be doing that. Its 3-letter identifier is Lima Foxtrot Victor, and then its Morse code identifier is dot dash dot 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 dash dot 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 dash. You could also look at the Martha's Vineyard VOR. Now, what you may notice about Martha's Vineyard VOR is you don't actually see the VOR symbol. That is because the VOR is actually located on the airport, on the field. You can actually see that is indicated here with this little white circle on the actual airport symbol. That's telling you where it's located on the airport. Again, you have the circle with all the tick marks and from 0 all the way around. You have VOR DME. This is giving you the actual, showing you DME because you can't actually see the symbol, so it has to give you the information, VOR-DME. Martha's Vineyard is the name. The frequency is 114.5. The channel for your TRACON is 92. Your 3-letter identifier is Mike Victor Yankee. And the Morse code identifier is dash dash dot 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 dash dash dot dash dash. You'll be able to hear that inside the aircraft once we get into it. I can demonstrate that for you. Now, before we get into the actual aircraft, there is a topic we need to discuss, and that is the difference between 3 different things. So let's jump over to this animation real fast, and let's discuss how to actually navigate using a VOR. Let's pretend this is a VOR. In the center is the actual VOR station. Around it is your blue circle that we talked about with the tick marks. Now, this is a simplified version with only the every 30 degrees marked on the compass, unlike in the actual VFR sectional. So, like I mentioned, there are 3 main things that you need to be able to differentiate in order to actually navigate with VOR, and that is heading, bearing, and radial. The heading is the magnetic heading of your aircraft. The bearing is the magnetic course to the VOR. Finally, the radial is the magnetic course coming off of or from the VOR. To better illustrate this, let's imagine you're flying a Cessna 172 to the south of the VOR station. You're wanting to fly to the north to actually arrive at the VOR station. So, what would your bearing be? What would your aircraft heading be? And what radial would you be flying on? Well, if we draw a line from our aircraft to the center of the VOR, you'll see that our heading is 360 degrees, our bearing to the VOR is 360 degrees, and we're on the 180 radial from the VOR. Now imagine we're to the southwest of the VOR station, and we want to fly to the VOR. We would be on the 210 radial, our bearing to the VOR station would be 030, and our heading would also be 030. Here's where it starts getting confusing. Imagine if we're flying away from the VOR. What would our heading be? What would our bearing be? And what would our radial be? Our heading would be 180, our bearing to the VOR would be 360, and we'd be flying on the 180 radial. On our OBI, we have a cool little thing. It's called a flag. It shows to and from. In this instance, it would show you from. We are flying away from the VOR. We would have 180 put into our OBI, and it would give us the flag saying from. We're flying from the VOR. In the instance before we were flying to the VOR, we had tuned into a heading of 360, our bearing was 360, and we're flying on the radial 180, we would have the to flag, letting us know we were flying to the VOR. Now, if you're still a little unsure of what all this means in regards to actually navigating inside the aircraft, don't worry. We're about to jump into that. Okay, we are in our Cessna 172 on the ground on Nantucket Memorial Airport. We're currently on runway 060. What we're going to do is we're going to fly from Nantucket to Martha's Vineyard and then fly towards Providence. Now, a couple things before we actually take off here. Remember the difference between heading, bearing, and radial. I'll be using these throughout this video, so it's important that you understand those differences. If you don't understand them, rewind this video, go back to the animation, rewatch it, see if you can get and grasp exactly what I'm talking about when I differentiate between heading, bearing, and radial. All right, so let's get started. Let's go ahead and take off here from Nantucket and get into the air. Perfect. We're now flying. I'm going to go ahead and prep my autopilot here. I'm going to select down to 1,500 feet. Go ahead and activate arm our 1,500 feet here. And let it continue us on our heading. I'll go ahead and set our heading bug as well. Of 060. So we'll select heading. Oops, says nav. Heading. And let the aircraft fly itself so I can focus on instructing the important part here. So if we look here on the actual instruments, this is your OBI. This is what you'll mainly be using for not only ILS but also for VORs. So in order to fly from a VOR, which is what we'll be doing at first, we'll fly from a VOR, we'll fly from Nantucket VOR, and then we'll fly to Martha's Vineyard VOR, and then we'll demonstrate flying over Martha's Vineyard VOR and what it looks like on your OBI. And then we'll talk about how you can actually find out where you are in the map just by using your VOR instruments. Looks like we're about to level off 1,500 feet, so I'm going to reduce throttle here just a little bit. Right about 2,100 RPMs looks just about right there. Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to tune the Nantucket VOR. Nantucket VOR is going to be 116.2, so 116.2. We'll make that active, and you'll notice that the actual VOR it's flipping back and forth. And the reason why it flipped like that is because we actually ended up just flying over it, which, let's see if I can see it here. Funny that yep, there it is right there on a roadway. But there's the actual VOR there. So if we look on our OBI, which is kind of hard to see, right now it's saying 2, right? Why is it saying 2? Well, we have it set to where we are on the west, so we're going to be flying, quote-unquote, to it westbound, which technically we are now east of the actual VOR. So if we wanted to fly off of the VOR, let's say heading westbound, let's say we wanted to fly off of Nantucket's 300 radial, all we'd have to do is turn this in, flip it around here. You'll notice it flips from and to as we get on here. So, important distinction. So, if we put it in 300 here, it's going to currently say 2. And well, you're thinking, okay, why is it saying 2? But we're wanting to fly from, well, remember, we are on the east side of the VOR, and we're wanting to fly off of the west side. So, if we take our heading bug, and let's say we put it 270 here. Let it fly this way. What you'll see happen, and you'll notice this as we kind of pass over the VOR from east to west, you'll notice something that happens. on our OBI. So wait for that to happen here. So right now we're going to be flying, our heading will be 270, and we're going to try to pick up the 300 radial off of the Nantucket VOR. So our bearing to the Nantucket VOR will be 120. Once we actually pick up the 300 radial VOR from the VOR, our bearing to the VOR will be 120 degrees. And our heading will be 300, because we'll be on the 300 radial, flying from, remember? Okay, so we'll let it continue to fly here. Out and look. Just notice that it switched from to to from. Because, again, we're so close to the VOR that we just crossed over the north to south 0 line. So we're now on the west side of the VOR, so it's actually detecting, okay, you're actually wanting to fly from. So what does that mean in regards to the actual OBI? Well, if you look here, this little circle is supposed to indicate our aircraft. This line indicates that radial. This is the CDI. Of course, I don't remember what the D stands for, but the I is the indicator. This is the CDI. This is actually what tracks your course and gives you an idea of what the actual radial is. So if we continue flying 270, eventually this line will start moving back towards the center. That lets us know we're getting close to the radial. So we'll continue flying here. Once we get close, we'll move our aircraft more towards the 300 heading to kind of meet up with that radial off the Nantucket VOR. So remember, off the Nantucket VOR, what does off mean? Off means you're coming from. You're going from the VOR. You're going to be going from. When it's off of 300 radial, we're flying away from. We'll be on the 300 radial, flying from the VOR. All right. Come on now, let's get closer here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to spin this to 240 just to get us a little bit more direct against the radial here. So you can actually see this move towards us here. A little faster. Again, the VOR is going to be off this direction somewhere. I know I flew over it. See if I can see it. Oh, there it is. So there's the VOR right there. So we're going off of the VOR, 300 radial. So we're waiting to intersect that. And we should be picking it up here. Yep, here we go. Here we go. Now it's starting. So if we go ahead and start making our turn here, the 300 radial, 300 heading of 300. 300 is our bearing. And this is our radial of 300. I'm sorry, a bearing is opposite. A bearing is 120. All right, so a little bit, let's get a little bit more to the right here. All right, so that's going to come back center here. And in fact, we can actually use autopilot and say, hey, navigate. What does it mean? That means the aircraft's actually going to fly using this right here, actually keep us on our radial. So, with that being said, we're flying from Nantucket on the 300 radial to Martha's Vineyard. So, what if we want to do a 2 course, right? So we don't want to fly away from a VOR. We want to fly to a VOR. 2 different distinctions, right? So you may not have another VOR in the area, so you're trying to get a radial off of a VOR. That's what we just did, from a VOR. Now, if you're wanting to fly to a VOR, let's say you don't currently have a VOR, or you're flying from another VOR to another VOR, and you want to fly to a VOR. So on your actual OBI, you're going to have the 2 flag, remember, because you're going to it. And remember, when you're going to a VOR, your bearing, radial, and heading are going to look a little different than what you had with the from. So if I'm flying to Martha's Vineyard, I'll be flying on Martha's Vineyard 120 radial. Okay, so I want to fly off of, or fly to Martha's Vineyard off their 120 radial. So if we tune, let's go ahead and put heading in here just a second so we don't go crazy here. So if we tune 120, right? Now we're seeing 2. We're getting the 2 flag, 120. And here's our radial. Perfect. So we're flying to Martha's Vineyard now on the 120 radial. It's as simple as that. Now, a cool thing here that kind of helps you out if you want to think about it this way. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. We're not flying to Martha's Vineyard yet right now. If we're flying to, and we haven't changed our frequency, it gives us this right here. We're flying to, we're still flying to Nantucket, right? On the 120, we're actually flying the 300 radial to Nantucket. So we got to change the frequency here. Martha's Vineyard. So we're going to do that. Switch down here, and Martha's Vineyard is 114.5. Switch that. And now you're saying, okay, it's saying from, though. Why is it saying from Martha's Vineyard? Well, right now, the way that we have this configured is we are picking up the 120 radial. This top little triangle is always going to pick up the radial. This is the radial that you're actually picking up. So if I wanted to fly to Martha's Vineyard and I want this to indicate 2, I need to put the radial down here at the bottom. So radial at the bottom, my bearing is always going to be at the top. Bearing of 120. So now I notice that, okay, I'm a little bit off to the right here, so I can move myself to the left, get a little bit closer onto the radial here, and fly to Martha's Vineyard. So again, if you're flying to somewhere, your bearing is always going to be at the top. If you're flying from somewhere, your bearing is going to be at the bottom. Think, okay, that's a little odd. Well, not really when you think about it. If you're flying to somewhere, your bearing is going to be at the top. Flying from somewhere, your bearing is going to be at the bottom. Remember, bearing is the direction to the VOR, whether you're flying from or to. So if I switched back over to Nantucket, I am flying from Nantucket's VOR on the 300 radial. Very good. And my bearing to it is 120. I flip it again, flying to Martha's Vineyard. I am flying on the 120 radial and the 300 bearing. Bearing is always going to be there at the top. Okay? And if you're flying to, from, it's going to be at the bottom. Because remember, bearing is to the VOR, heading is completely different. That is completely off of it. And then your actual radial you're flying on is going to be different as well. Now, if you're still confused about this, my advice is to actually get into the Cessna 172 and play around with this. This is going to, the best way to learn, for me at least, is hands-on. This little area up here in the northeast is a perfect opportunity to try out a bunch of different types of VOR navigation. You can fly to a VOR, from a VOR, from and to a VOR, across a VOR, all different types of navigations with a VOR. Now let's say we are kind of off in the middle of nowhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our heading here. We're just going to push ourselves down to 10. And I want to show you guys how you can actually find out where you are using just VORs. As long as you have 2 VORs and you can pick up their frequencies, you can figure out exactly where you are. Called triangulation. Using 2 different known points and 2 different known points, 2 different bearings, you can identify where you are in the world. So to do that, all you're going to do Remember, we have two different VORs we're going to be shooting off of, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. So my second little navigational radio, I'm going to put in Nantucket's VOR, 116.2. I'll make that active on my number 2 here. And primary will keep Martha's Vineyard. So remember, if I wanted to get my bearing to the VOR station, that's really simple. All I have to do is move this around and get my bearing. Now it's saying from here, so it'd be opposite. So let's do 2 here. This is much easier. Less. And right about here, in between, we're looking at about 100. So pause it for a second. So if I were to fly to Nantucket from here, my bearing would be 100. Okay, that's important. So my bearing, write this down. You guys can do this with me. Your bearing to Nantucket is 100. All right, so what is our bearing to Martha's Vineyard? Well, 2, let's go ahead and start moving this. Martha's Vineyard is, looks like it's going to be 312. Or about there. So 312. Yeah, looks like we got a little off here on the bottom. Yeah, so 312 on 2 Martha's Vineyard and 100 to Nantucket. So let's go over to Sky Vector and see what that looks like and figure out exactly where we are. Okay, so we remember that our bearing to Nantucket VOR was 100. So what is the opposite of 100? That's going to be a radial of 280. So off the 280 radial. Okay, so perfect. 280 radial. It's actually giving us a line right off here. Perfect. And what was our bearing to Martha's Vineyard? 312. So what is the opposite of 312? Well, that's going to be, let me get my calculator out. I don't want to get this wrong. 132. 132 radial. Okay, so the 132, so the 130, right about here. So if we do that triangulation, shoot off, ends up, we're basically right off these islands off Nantucket, just about right in here. So with just 2 different bearings, 2 different VORs, you can find out exactly where you are. It's pretty easy once you understand the concept. Now, what if we wanted to figure out the distance from where we are to, let's say, Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard? Besides using the actual on the actual chart itself, there is a measurement of how many nautical miles little area is, which is actually this right here. And this, each one of these is actually a nautical mile, and that's every single latitude. But anyway, so minutes on the latitude scale. That's actually each one is nautical mile, 1 nautical mile, which is pretty cool and nice to know. What if we wanted to figure out our distance using, let's say, the equipment inside of our aircraft? We can do that as well using the DME. So let's do that real fast back in the 172. So what if we wanted to find out the distance to Martha's Vineyard, so to speak? We flip this information, this little thing down here, which is your DME device, and we'll switch to the Martha's Vineyard frequency of 114.50, and boom, 13.5 nautical miles from Martha's Vineyard. What about Nantucket? Well, I'll put in Nantucket's VOR, and that's going to be 116.20. Boom, 15.7 nautical miles from Nantucket. So that's pretty much how you use VORs for navigating. You can actually find out exactly where you are on the map. You can go to and from a VOR. And just note that your heading, bearing, and radial may all be different. And that's okay. If you have wind that you're having to do cross correction with, your heading is not going to equal your bearing or your radial. And that's fine. As long as you understand the difference between heading, bearing, and radial, you'll be just fine. And as long as you can find a VOR on the map, tune it, and fly to it, you can navigate using a VOR. So there you have it. That is basically how you navigate using VORs and DMEs. Hopefully this has made some type of sense. I apologize if it's kind of scattered or you don't understand part of it. If you don't, be sure to ask me questions in the comments down below or join me over on Discord. I do want to say a huge thanks to my Patreons over at patreon.com/mmflightclub. I would not be able to do these videos without their support, so huge thanks to my Patreon members. If you want to become a Patreon member, head on over to patreon.com/mmflightclub and join as little as $3 a day. Thanks again for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you guys next time in the sky.